Hello, everyone. A special QE Babble here for you. We're just following up on last week's session, which was all to do with Richard Williams's exciting new tool, the Quality Intelligence Engine. So during the session, we had lots of questions come in from all the people who were watching, which is brilliant. But in the 45 minutes that we had, and with an active conversation in flow, we didn't have time to answer all of those. So just wanted to come back today just to make sure that everyone who did ask a question gets the opportunity to have those answered by Richard and also from Neil. So they're back with us now, and we're going to run through and go to the first one of those questions or topics, which was to do with AI and non-determinism. And we had some questions coming from Vandita Singh and Ashwin on that subject. Richard, do you want to give us an idea about how the tool looks at non-determinism and trust?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a few variations on that question. So I think for me, the key distinction for me is QIE isn't trying to model runtime behavior. It's looking at how something's defined, the expectations, constraints, and controls. So even with AI systems, those still exist. We're not trying to make non-deterministic systems deterministic. We're applying structured assurance thinking to how they're specified and governed. So also on the trust, it's not about blind trust. It's about making the reasoning visible so it can be challenged. So hopefully that helps answer some of those questions that were around those particular areas.
Yeah, and I think, Rich, as well as the tool itself, as you said, fundamentally working on a risk-based tools rules engine and looking at building out that repository of knowledge against different contexts you've built over time and compiling that. With the recalibration, that gives you a level of a view of some sense of stability and guardrails through there. The non-deterministic nature we're seeing forming in AI testing and AI-related code, that will be a different approach that comes later. There introduces a different set of factors and risks in that level of understanding of what can be determined. Because again, if you look at an LM, the non-deterministic nature is down to how you define the prompt and just the sheer amount of variables within those outcomes to get you to an endpoint. As we refine those engines and we find those models, we can be clearer on what kind of outcome we're seeking, and we can start using that as part of the risk-based model engine, looking at the factors we're building out from what we see in other modeling tools of the non-deterministic behavior to see how that's performing so we can assess a risk of AI code and what it generates. Similarly, as the new AI standards come out from the EU and the UK government, we can start implementing those into the rules-based engine that Rich has been building and looking specifically at how we qualify and quantify AI behavior as a risk, as a separate layer. So I think it's something that can be evolved and will evolve, but we're still fairly early in how we address risk in that way. And also, particularly with AI, who is defining and owning the risk, not just from a legislatory manner as it comes through, but generally as an organisational level. At the moment, I'm seeing a lot of push of that back onto QE engineering organisations. And really, we have to look earlier at what that risk is. And I think, again, the engine, as it develops, can help us determine where we're introducing that risk and how we're introducing that risk with the level of AI and the level of prompts we're introducing into our systems.
Absolutely, and it's designed so that it's modular, so the rules can be extended, they can be expanded to support that AI aspect. And the way I designed this particular tool is that the decision, the risk ownership always exists within the seat, not within the computer. So it's always that human that's ultimately there to use it to accelerate, to get them to that point of decision faster with greater clarity. But the onus is still on the individual, never on the AI enriched output.
Human in the loop, right?
Human in the loop.
There we go. Good. That's all. That was answered. Hopefully. So thanks for those questions. The next one was about how the engine is designed. I had quite a few people asking questions about this and credibility. So Phil Durrell, Ray Palmerston asked some questions here. Do you want to talk briefly about how the engine was put together?
Yeah, I can. And I guess part of this is people that healthy skepticism that's just wanting to know that is this just AI dressed up? And I suppose the way I describe it is this is structured logic first with AI then supporting it. So there's a classification, there's a structure, and there's a whole repeatability aspect to it that builds this whole assurance model. Once the assurance model's been applied over the source document, the AI is then used to help interpret and express it. And some of the questions again were around learning across clients and learning across individuals, and there's a potential risk and exposure there. The way that I've run this and it exists as it is today is that there is no learning across clients per se. The rules could evolve based on risks and be recalibrated to determine kind of what you might want to do if something's seen as a particularly higher risk or a particular greater implication. Then you may update the rule pack and the values that are given. But each run in itself is isolated, so there is no learning, there's no information leakage across clients. That was an intentional form of control that I designed fairly early on, so that it wasn't necessarily something that user A would be compromised by user B and vice versa. Doesn't mean that you couldn't ring fence it and use the output for a client as a whole, but that's not currently how it runs. There's a broader development piece that's being looked at to enhance that capability.
Which makes sense, because you probably wouldn't want it to be, you wouldn't want how it looks at client A to bleed into how it looks at client B, because I guess you want the tool to look at each situation on its merits rather than be influenced by something which might be wholly different to it.
Absolutely. And I think that's where some of the hallucination can bleed in when you just use AI and the self-learning that exists within those. This keeps the two separate.
Yeah. Okay. Anything to add on that one, Neil?
Really just builds on what Richard was saying. So for me, the fact that you've separated out the rules engine and you're building local domain specific data sets at the moment makes sense. I think, again, as it evolves and as there's opportunity to evolve in terms of how you platform it and how you license and control that model, there is an opportunity to use AI to decontextualize some of that information to feed back into the tool. But again, how you build those guide rails and controls and those calibrations as you go is probably going to be more an evolutionary building standard to calibrate out based on your tame sample of positive users who are in your pilot and early demonstration phase to help build and provide that context and calibrate it that way. So I think, again, it comes back to the human in the loop, the assisted intelligence approach to help build out from that information better controls of markers within the rules engine and incrementally building out context to give you a better understanding across a wider sampling range as it goes.
Thanks, Neil. The next one was about its usage. A couple of kind of core questions that a user might ask. Russell specifically asked, and I think actually Richard and I, we've discussed this previously, how it might deal with loose requirements that aren't maybe formatted in the right way or potentially come through a little bit more informal or a bit scrappy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the practical ones are the ones I kind of like the most, if I'm honest. And yes, I've used a well-formatted, well-structured requirement specification to demonstrate the capability. But there are a whole host of differing quality requirement documents that I've used to actually validate the system. And most of the ones that I've used to test it are actually quite messy, older, less structured, less considered. But don't make for as pleasant a demo experience because it's harder to see the source and the output. So I think the one thing to say is that it's actually designed for imperfect inputs. It's designed for real delivery artifacts, and they're often messy. I find that in practice, that's where it becomes more useful, not less. And in terms of, there were other questions around the deployment. It's flexible. So this is the practical use aspect. So yeah, it's designed to handle the messier documents because that's where it's actually getting into the meat of the risk and what's either being well articulated or poorly articulated within the document. And that's where I think it really does shine. And as I say, practical usage wise, there were questions around deployment. It's somewhat flexible. It can run locally in a controlled environment, or it can be run remotely by myself or others, depending on what's needed, really. But yeah, there were some of the practical usage aspects that I'd considered from the questions.
Cool, brilliant. Should we look at output and interpretation? So we had quite a few questions from Stephen Burnley, Gavenga asked a couple. Do you want to give us a bit of an idea about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And it ties in with some feedback that Neil shared as well in the past. And there's some good points around how the output's used, different audiences, product versus project risk, and the visualizations. I suppose for me, the underlying risk doesn't change. It's how you express it. And that's probably the aspect that probably should evolve and update. At the moment, there are limited personas that are used to drive the narrative and enrichment that's applied within the LLM. But that again is modular. So I do have additional personas that will evolve the output and change the way the risks are presented, the order of the risks, and what may be considered a concern for a quality assurance lead may be different to what's presented as a risk manager, a CTO, a CIO. At the moment, I often just present the standard exec summary view because that's the most relevant, that's the most appropriate, that fits most audiences, because there's also then the detailed breakdown that exists within the latter tabs of the output. But it's certainly something that's evolving. And it's essentially placing different lenses over the same output. So it doesn't mean that the actual engine itself has to change. All the information's there. It's just the narrative, the enrichment, and the lens that's applied across that to present it back is what evolves. And then on the product versus project risk, I'll be honest, I tend to anchor more on product level consequences rather than project level consequences. And that's probably because that's what actually matters for the most part when things go wrong, when people are actually working on delivery. So it leans more towards that angle, just because that's the one that tends to have the bigger consequences, the bigger implications, and the greater focus from those senior stakeholders that would likely be the consumers of this.
And what I liked from looking at the early prototypes you've given me, Richard, I've been playing with, is because it's based on a rules-based engine, those outcomes will always be the same. It's the interpretation layer through the AI that gives you the different perspectives. And again, you can build, and personas can be built out, but also just through a simple API interface, again, because there are so many variations on how people like things presented. Adding in that API layer to give people the ability to generate the graphs through the tooling that's appropriate to their context, be that the Smart Bear tooling, be that the Artislan stack, be that using X-Ray or Jira to call out these kind of things. It helps then to generate that into the format that's going to be consumed by the decision makers in a way that works for them. And again, the flexibility you've built in terms of how the rules layer builds out a definitive answer and provides the context of how that answer has been derived, as it is a derivation from the rules, based on your knowledge and the context you've applied to the engine, then again, that can also evolve over time in terms of how those outputs are provided. But the fundamental core is based on observation, human measurement, your experience, and additional context coming in. So it has the ability to grow, it has a stable base, and it has a way of being calibrated to help provide better outputs and views. And again, as we touched on last time, for me, and it's raised by many people quite often, is how QE engineering test chooses to communicate to be more effective. The way you framed your AI to assist to be non-aggressive, but accurate, information-based, off the rules, looking at different personas of what is the benefit and value from that person's perspective, I think that's a lot of value in terms of how we get the messaging across about risk and how we can help ensure risk is continually managed and not pushed back into a QA test silo in the future when we talk of AI and the interpretation of those models. We have something solid we can base on and communicate effectively across all of the key stakeholders in a way that a collective decision can be reached effectively.
Absolutely, and you touched on something there that just made me think. Someone in a separate chat has asked me, well, what if it's wrong? Well, it's allowed to be wrong. It doesn't profess to get things right 100% of the time. What it's not allowed to be is opaque. You can see and challenge the reasoning. You can invalidate the reasoning. It doesn't hide anything. Everything's there. It's presented. And I think with the risks, it also presents back not just a view of the risk, but also the so what. So this is the risk that it's flagged, but it also gives questions and guidance, and it leads the reviewer to consider what's been flagged and provide them a series of recommendations as to how to work to mitigate. It doesn't try and answer all the questions because that's very much linked to the person understanding the document, the context, the industry where it's been applied, but it will provide them guidance notes on how to resolve, how to affect, how to improve on what's been flagged. And all of that's transparent and it's there and it's available and it's able to be challenged, because I don't say trust it blindly. It's right most of the time. In fact, more often than not. But there'll always be that one instance where it's not, and people are right to challenge. But it gets you to that challenge, that question, that position far quicker than just reviewing a blank document. It provides the output in mere minutes, quicker than you can even read the first couple of pages. And that's what it's delivering. It's that accelerator. It's giving the person the ability to just do more, deliver greater value sooner, be far more effective in their role. And that's what it's aiming to achieve.
Love it. And just a final point, which we are touching on there really as well in terms of its positioning. So just clarify again for us, Richard, who's using this tool? Who you think is actually going to be picking it up and getting most benefit from it?
I suppose anybody that's got a view, an interest, a concern in delivery risk. So there's a whole range of people. I've often said that risk is everybody's accountability, everybody's responsibility. Anybody that's involved in delivery will have a view of risk in one shape or another. What's it trying to do? It's not about automating QA or replacing people. It's about applying assurance thinking earlier, more consistently, and at a scale that's hard to do manually. It's not really about tooling. It's more, how do we surface and reason about delivery risk? So anybody that's interested in that delivery risk is ultimately a consumer and someone that would stand to benefit from using a tool like this to get to that answer as quickly as possible.
Neil,
Yeah,
where would it add value, do you think, in your world? How does it?
Perspective, yeah, no problem. So from my perspective, this is a tool that is there to help, as Richard was saying, communicate consistently and provide you an overview of risk. In engineering organizations, that can sit across the whole engineering organization. But for me, the real value is in the taking this back to product owners and getting them to understand and help articulate risk and understand the risk to help manage however they're building that out. Particularly as we're now moving in, a lot of organizations are starting to chase very hard AI generating code and using that as a cost reduction. Having this as a way of understanding even that risk and communicating that risk is of value. So as Richard says, it's the aid to thinking. It's not replacing human thinking. It's not replacing the human in the loop, the human decision maker, but it's helping us get to Our 80-20 rule, our Pareto, quicker. As Richard says, and we ran this in the demo, it's reading a 60-page document in under 3 minutes. I can read these days, depending on which glasses I'm wearing, probably about 10 pages in 3 minutes. If I'm doing it in a formal review meeting with multiple reviewers, well, you're talking probably a 60-page document taking half a day for all those reviewers to go through. And then we go through the comments and build consensus when we do it in very structured print-style 2 programs. So by aiding the speed of generating a common understanding so different questions can be asked, we can get to better outcomes more efficiently and help us drive our thinking and use that as a springboard to ask different questions of the system across the whole organisation. And that in itself is of significant value as it builds out and as it evolves. Just taking that ability to communicate in a common framework for communication being enhanced as it develops out from a known risk model gives us something to build on and use consistently across an organisation. And as we get more non-deterministic, consistency can be of great value because it at least is a consistent guide rail and measure we can work against.
Excellent. Anything else to add finally there, Richard?
No, I think Neil summed things up quite nicely there. I mean, I suppose it's similar in effect to if you put a question into something like ChatGPT, you can get any range of responses. If you provide a well-structured, well-reasoned, well-considered, whole framed series of a position into ChatGPT, you'll get a far more accurate, far more appropriate, far more correct response. Mm-hmm. And that leads into the using AI tools to build and develop the software. If you present poor quality inputs, you'll have a questionable output. If you can assure and identify, expose and resolve the risks before you feed it into that AI machine to create the output, you're giving yourself the best chance of delivering a higher quality output as a result. So absolutely.
So hopefully that has gone some way to answering the questions that we had coming from last week's session. And thank you again for everyone who contributed. I think the great joy I think of doing the lives is that you do get people who are watching along and are thinking of things. So hopefully we're able to come back to all of those in this second video, which is going to be posted onto YouTube and also onto LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, there'll be a link to follow up and register interested in Richard's tool. And there'll be more QIE Babble coming up in May, later in May. So thanks all for watching. Thanks both of you for contributions there. And see you all soon.
Thanks, Cheers. Matt. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers, Matt. Bye, everyone.